Today I'm speaking with Ray Patchett, aka Razor. Ray's had a long and interesting career as a fixed-wing ag pilot, but he's also an ideas man. Never happy with the status quo, he's always dreaming up new schemes and better ways to do things. And this has led to several innovations or inventions. Although Ray doesn't call them inventions, he just says, I built them because I needed a better way. It's an honour for me to interview Ray. He's been a good friend for many years and I've learned a lot and been entertained by him for a long time. I hope you enjoyed this interview. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thanks. Oh well, it's pretty cool to be in this brand new workshop of yours. Which doesn't seem to take you too long to build, but what's the plan here? It looks quite exciting.
Well, I've had 3 hangars, as you know, on Marlborough Airfield, and the last one was pretty big. So they're all open and loader drivers coming in and out and always buying tools. And I just wanted something for my retirement that was cosy, insulated, just very clean and easy to keep tidy, and I'll spend a lot of time in here.
And I see you've got some plans, like aircraft plans. What's the plan?
Well, in 1979, I built a little all-metal single-seat home-built aeroplane. I didn't finish it. I built about 80% of the airframe. And as we all were in 1979, I was broke and I had to sell it to look to get my commercial pilot license. And so unfinished business.
What's the aeroplane?
It's a Pasmini PL4, small single-seat airplane with a very large cockpit, which is what I like about it, and folding wings so it can be kept in the garage.
Right.
Towed to the airfield.
And is it a kit set or do you build it from scratch?
No, pretty much if you build a kit set now, you're giving someone 100,000.
Yeah.
No, I want it to last, to keep me occupied for maybe 5 years. So, yeah.
What engine does it have?
It was designed to have a 50 horsepower Volkswagen, but of the several hundred of them that have been built around the world, they were designed in 1972. Most people put between 85 and 100 horsepower in them now, so they go pretty good.
Will you put a V-dub engine in it, or?
No. I'm quite keen on these Viking aircraft engines, which are converted Mitsubishi and Honda 3 and 4 cylinder engines ranging from about 90 horsepower through to about 200. I'd like to put a 90 horsepower liquid cooled. And very light, 200 pound, including radiators, water, gearbox, everything on it. So, yeah.
Watch this space.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't really mind if I never finished it.
Yeah.
It's about the build more than the aeroplane.
Yeah. You've probably done enough flying in your life.
Yeah, done a week or two.
Anyway, I have to say, Razor, I feel quite honoured to be able to interview you. We've been mates for a few years. And something I've always admired about you is that you're a bit of a thinker. Probably call you an ideas man. You think outside the box. You're always trying to find a different way to do things, probably a better way to do things, and you're not afraid to try new ideas. And a perfect example of that, I've got a picture here to show you, and you're probably the only or one of very few people in the world who will know what this is, I would say.
Oh, yes. Yeah, well, that's a heavy suspension fertilizer spray boom which was designed to handle very thick suspensions like reactive phosphate rock, lime, sulphur, mostly all the elements that we use to fertilise the soil with.
But the important thing is it's something that you invented, this.
Yeah, we patented
device.
it, yeah.
So when I actually looked this up on the patent's website, and when I read the words inventor Raymond Lester Patchett, it sort of had quite a amazing ring to it. Inventor.
Mad scientist.
Yeah. Because I sort of thought, some of us come up with an idea which we might think is a bit unique from time to time, but I don't know hardly any of us come up with an idea that no one in the world has ever had, and then you take the time, through process of trial and error to perfect it, and then you take the effort to patent it, and then you use it commercially, and all because no one else has got anything better. And that just sort of seemed quite an amazing thing to do. How did that feel at the time for you I'm sure it was a long process.
It was actually. They say that necessity is the mother of all invention, and it's, in this case, was dead right. I'm not actually an inventor. We were pumping out heavy suspensions and having everything block. Every day was just a nightmare. But I was trying to achieve a goal, and the goal was to get the water out of the mix, because it doesn't contribute anything, but it's essential. And all fertilisers are mixed with a carrier, and most standard fertilisers have about 65% carrier. We got our carrier, being the water, down to 20%. So that was...
So why do you say you're not an inventor?
Well, yeah, I see where you're at.
Is that you being humble, or is that, this was your idea?
Yeah, well, it was just, I had a need.
Yeah.
And it was driving me mad because everything was blocking. I mean, you'd put a mix in and you'd fly it out to the block, and then you'd have to come and land back with it, which wasn't always easy because it wouldn't pump out. Or it pumped the first run out, you turned around and you open the valve to pump the second half of the load out, and it's blocked. And surprise, surprise.
And I suppose the difference between you and 90% of us is that we would just go, it doesn't work, we'll go back to doing solids or something.
Yeah.
Whereas you took the time to fix the problem.
There was another side to that, which was a selfish side of it. And that was, when I first started ag flying, I started in a Piper Cub with 150 horsepower. And I was flying a Fletcher for top dressing and a Piper Cub for spraying. We couldn't at the time get $320 an hour for a Fletcher, carrying a ton of super and charging by the ton. And but when it came the winter time and the Dimmelin spraying was in vogue, the helicopters did all that, and they were charging $12 a hectare. And we're talking the early 80s, mid 80s. And so I said, well, I reckon I can do this with the Piper Cub. I can spray 30 litres to the hectare, and as long as I stuck to big faces that didn't lead you into Dead Pilot Gully too much, we'd get away with it. Well, it was a great hit. And I was doing it for $6 a hectare. Now, we were carrying 350 litres, 30 litres to the hectare, and doing a trip about every 4 minutes. Do the maths. We were getting 600 and 650 an hour for a Piper Cub with 150 horsepower, and we couldn't get 320 due to the competition. with a 400 horsepower Fletcher that swallowed swimming pools full of fuel. And that's why a lot of the big aviation ag companies went broke.
So what did that have to do with the suspension?
Right. Well, that's a good question. Well, I figured if you're charged by the hectare, you could, there was enterprise in it. If you're charged by the ton, it was like working for an hourly rate as a wage earner. There's no enterprise in it. And of course, we were offering a service then that was half the price of the helicopter. And we were making twice the money. We were top dressing with a thumping big 400 horsepower engine. So it was how do you solid fertilise by the hectare? Well, you couldn't just start charging by the hectare. You wouldn't get any work because all your opposition charged by the ton, and at the time seemed to be happy to earn what our company continually told us was not enough money for them to have a future.
So it sort of spawned a new way of...
It did. And
marketing.
then I got interested in the science of it. That's another story, but that's why I did it.
Other examples of you being a thinker that I sort of jotted down were, the couple of new types of aeroplanes you brought into the country, the Fat Man, which was the first of type, I think. Was that
Yes,
right?
It was.
The Drom.
Yeah, Dromader.
First and last of type.
I know there was one other came to New Zealand, but
right.
Yeah.
The self-loader, which we'll talk about, having a gyro, which is obviously not unique, but probably something a bit different for someone who's been into fixed wing all their life. People looking a bit sideways. So, do you think you were like this as a kid, or is it something that developed when the need arose?
My earliest memory of wanting to make something that wasn't there was when we were kids at Molesworth Station, and I used to love the S Bedfords, or they were RL Bedfords, whatever they called them. They were four-wheel drive quads. And I used to have this dream of making a wooden Bedford. But yeah, no, I wasn't really... I didn't run around looking for things to invent. It was just, when I did the self-loader, it was. I had a loader driver that had a lovely wife who was a night nurse, and it used to piss me off when she would answer the phone at 4:30 in the morning, just having completed a shift, because he couldn't be bothered putting the phone on his side of the bed. And starting your day off, waking up a night nurse that's been helping everybody out all night is not a good way to start your day.
You mentioned Molesworth. Seems like you had quite an interesting early childhood, because you were telling me that when you were a baby, your whole family moved and lived in a little hut on Molesworth Station, the guide hut. Why did they go there? Or you go there?
Well, at the time, I was born in 1953 in Oamaru, and my father was the rabbit board inspector on the Marlborough rabbit board back then, and he obviously took a job at Molesworth Station, and so there was me and my older brother. He was 18 months older than me, and I don't remember the guide hut, obviously. I was one. But my mother told me it was pretty cold.
So there was two kids at the time.
Yep, I had an older brother.
But that must have been pretty brutal for her.
Oh, it was, and she complained bitterly, she told me, until the ultimatum was we move into the station or we move out. Mm-hmm. So we moved into a cottage at Molesworth Station, at the homestead.
And how long did you live up the Molesworth for?
Until May of 1960, and then we moved to town. And I missed the place like hell.
So what was your upbringing like? Were there other kids you could play with apart from your family, or how'd you do schooling? Or
there were a couple of families, and of course the station manager, Bill Chisholm's daughter Anne, was a little bit older than me, same age as my older brother, and we played a lot with Anne and other kids that lived. There's 2 or 3 other. I think there was a Marfell family and a Holmes family. We had a great upbringing.
Yeah,
it was great.
Yeah, and then you moved into Blenheim when you were, what'd you say, 7?
7 or 8,
something like that.
Yeah, 1960.
Yeah, yeah. And then your parents split a couple of years later, and Dad had Molesworth in his blood. Was that right? And I think you said he was obsessed with Molesworth.
Well, he was the high country. He was a rugby, racing and beer man. Huge supporter of the 6 o'clock swill. And of course, we ended up with 7 kids. There was an 8th one came along later on to a different father. But yeah, I always concluded that that my father should never have got married. He didn't do domestic things. He didn't do towns, and he didn't do kids very much. But he was a hard thing, and he was a typical high country man. He didn't say a lot, drank a lot of beer, and was pretty hard on dogs. But to his friends, he was a hell of a good bloke, and a bit of a legend in his time.
And when he went back to Molesworth, did you kids go up and visit him, or?
No, well, he went back to Upcott Station, or Glenlee Station first, and then he moved to Upcott, and he spent the rest of his days working for the Rabbit Board, in doing some work, assisting some work at Molesworth, rabbiting work. But he just had to be amongst the hills, really. He didn't do town at all.
And in one of Dave Baldwin's articles about you, he mentioned about your dad's poems, which I think you said you haven't got them, there's no record of them. But
no, I have seen them, and there were, after he died, our cousins sent me some of them. And goodness knows where they are now, but a couple of titles that I remember. One, where the Awa tree flows and the blue borage grows. And then there was the Ring Hill Radio, which was all about the characters. He looked a lot like Barry Crump, and he spoke a lot like Barry Crump, because men of high country guys of the era were like that.
But he must have been a bit of a thinker as well in his time. If he's putting these lyrics together and writing poetry. And
yeah, he wrote a song once called "Brum Come Up the River Just the Same," and I remember hearing them singing it at parties, and it was about Brum Nation, who was a guy who had the first mail truck up to Molesworth, and he was a bit of a legend for always getting the mail there, and each verse would be, there'd be a huge flood, but Brum come up the river just the same. And that was the last line of each verse. A pretty famous guy, really, old Brum Nation,
yeah. At some point when you were maybe a young teenager, you became a bit obsessed with being a pilot.
Actually, it was earlier than that. When we lived at Molesworth, we did correspondence, and we started correspondence earlier than most, sort of 3 or 4 years old. And I can remember the old man coming home from the airstrip for lunch, where the guys would be spreading carrots with piper cubs and de Havilland beaver, Colin Green was the hero of the day, and I can remember my mother saying that if you got your schoolwork done by the time your father got home, you could go back over to the airstrip, which was across the river, and watch the aeroplanes. So from that very early age, I was going to be an ag pilot. That's all I ever wanted to do, was fly ag.
And you mentioned a story about watching someone have a wee bit of a whoopsie.
Yeah, the late Dave Bishop, he was a great guy, and I had a lot to do with Dave. But back then, when I was 13, and we were up at Upcott during the school holidays, and the rabbit board were flat out poisoning rabbits, and they used to use bagged carrots in those days in sugar bags. They'd be carted up rather than bulk like they do now. And we would chuck bags of carrots all day to get a ride in the plane. And Dave was flying a Cessna 180, and he said I could come for a ride. So I got in, and I did 2 or 3 loads. And he was just God. And then he kicked me out and said, "You better get out. I'm going to get a load of fuel on board. It will be a bit heavy, and you can get back in after I burn the fuel down a bit." So that was great. And of course, I get out of the plane, and boy, am I going to be like Mr. Bishop or what? Anyway, he came back into land, and the Upcott airstrip, as you know, has got a slope. It slopes up into a gully. And he got it a bit wrong. And those Cessnas they're like a jumping jack with a sprung steel undercarriage legs, and it bounced like hell, and he hit the power. And he flew up, just missing us from the loading area over the top of us up into the gully.
And your eyes were like saucers.
Oh, boy. And I'm thinking, I don't think he can get out of here. And he thought the same. And so he told me later, because I ended up working with him, but he told me later that there was no way he was going to try and turn out of there, and he couldn't outclimb it. So he was going to have to land it on the side of the hill, which he did. He didn't do that good a landing. And she cartwheeled down into the creek, and I'll still remember it lying upside down in the creek and the windscreen coming out in 1,000 pieces, because they're quite a big pair of doors on a 180, and if they twisted the airframe, you couldn't get them open. So he scrambled out through the windscreen, and of course, we all rushed up there, my father and the rabbit board inspector and the other rabbiters that were there. And the late Barry McMillan, he was flying on that strip that day as well. And everyone's dead quiet, walking back down to the loading area.
He's stuck in the cockpit, is he, Dave?
No, David got out. Mm-hmm. He'd got out through the windscreen. And we were walking down there, and he was limping a bit, and he had a bit of blood on his face. And Barry said, because when I'd got out of after going for a ride, I was probably pissing everybody off, telling them just how much I was going to be an ag pilot. And so there was dead silence, and Barry said, "What are you going to be now, Ray?"
A rabbiter.
Not an ag pilot.
Yeah. How long did that last for?
Not long. Yeah.
Did Molesworth get in your blood like your dad's?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I never spent a lot of time back there. I flew off the airstrip in later years when I started flying. Did a lot of poisoning in the Clarence off the Molesworth airstrip. And you'd take off to the west and climb up through the Robinson Saddle and out into the Clarence, spreading oats and carrots and pellets for mostly for rabbits. So, but it always held an aura about it to me.
When did you start learning to fly?
1969. I started when I was 15.
I was just being born then.
Yeah, at the Marlborough Club, and you weren't allowed to go solo till you were 16, and I went solo. And my birthday was the end of November, and in December I went solo when I was 16. So that was 1969, the year they landed on the moon.
Yeah. How'd you pay for it?
I worked every night after school and all weekends up till about 3 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. And then I'd ride my bike out to the airfield and I could afford 20 minutes.
Wow. Once a week?
Yeah, once a week. Took quite a long time to get anywhere because by the time, only doing 20 minutes, by the time you got back the next week, you'd forgotten most of what you'd learned.
Yeah.
But I remember, of course, nobody booked anything up in those days, and you didn't borrow money.
Which was a good thing.
Yeah, and I remember one instructor, Kevin Hodson, he was the assistant instructor there, and I'd done my lesson with Brian Stokes, and I was on my bike, my brother's bike actually, because mine was broken. And I was about to go home, and Kevin came out and said, "Now go and get back in that aeroplane." And I said, "I can't, I haven't got any more money." He said, "You can book this one up." I never twigged. Oh, well, okay. So we hopped in and we went and did 3 circuits. And then we pulled the aeroplane to a stop and then taxied back to the threshold, and he said, "Right, can you handle one on your own?" Well, it hit me like a... And I'm thinking, no.
What sort of aeroplane was it?
It was a one... I trained in a 140 Cherokee, but that was a 160, that particular one. And so he said, "Well, you go." So I did. And that was in December 69.
So obviously the goal was to be a top dressing pilot, but you spent 4 years loading with Airwork Marlborough, Field Air, and then Rowley's. And I think you loaded for Dave Bishop, who had tumbled into the hill in front of you. Was he a bit of an idol for you?
He was. Well, he was...
When you were loading for him?
Yeah, he was. He was, of course, in excess of 25,000 hours he had done. He was a fantastic guy and was always teaching you something, and it always amazed me. He'd fly all week because, we had a lot of work on back then, and the weather was way more stable than it is nowadays. And so we'd go day after day after day. And come a nice Sunday morning, and we'd either cleaned up our work or the weather wasn't that flash. And I had a wee 90 horsepower Piper Cub. And all he'd want to do was sit in the back of that Cub and come flying with me.
Wow.
And I used to say to him, "Aren't you sick of it?" And he said, "No, I never get sick of it."
But you're a wee bit the same now too. You still go and enjoy going flying in a 172 or a Cub, don't you? After all these years. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I go a lot with my grandson, and I've got friends that are in shares with me in the wee Cessna that we've got.
The funny thing about top dressing or becoming a top dressing pilot is you usually get into it by loading first.
Yeah.
Whereas most other flying jobs, you're employed as a pilot and you go straight into the cockpit.
Yeah.
Why is it with top dressing, why is it an important thing to do that loading first? Critical.
As far as a boss is concerned, if you're going to put your neck on the line and train a guy, you want to know what he's like. You need him to have a good understanding of how the industry works. If you're going to stay in the area that you're trained, I learned a huge amount of, by the time I came to fly and I took over the base in Marlborough, because I did a couple of seasons in Canterbury first, spraying, I knew all the idiosyncrasies of all the airstrips because of what David taught me, why we knocked off, when we knocked off, and there's funny winds here and there's low sun will catch you at 9 o'clock in the morning here, so don't come to the strip before 9 o'clock. And aerial top dressing in New Zealand compared to ag flying around the world is all about getting on and off the ground. Because overseas, Australia and the States, and they've got fixed base operations with big long airstrips. And that's why most of the ag aircraft around the world don't have 2 seats in them. They don't need 2 seats. Whereas here in New Zealand, we take the Mountain 2 Mohammed, and you've got to carry a loader driver with you. 80% of the loader drivers travelling is done in the aeroplane. So local knowledge of winds, sitting in the aeroplane, looking at what looks right when you come out of the turn and you roll out at 150, 200 feet, and you're going to go onto a short one-way airstrip. You know what feels right. You know what washing speed off in a turn with pulling a little G, and then pull the nose up and arrest the sink with the power. As you well know, you've done a lot of flying. That's not learnt in 5 minutes, and it's a feel thing. So if you've spent several years sitting in alongside the pilot, arriving every morning and going home each night, you learn a heck of a lot about what's right. So when you start your training, you know all about how to brief a loader driver not to overload you, and all the things at smoko time that the pilot, if you're going to be an ag pilot, you better listen.
Yeah.
And I remember Nigel Griffith telling me when he before he came and brought me out, and he decided he wanted to be an ag pilot, and he asked an ag pilot icon in this country, Hallett Griffin, who's in excess of 50,000 hours, I want to be an ag pilot. What do you think? Hallett said, how well do you listen? And I never forgot when Nigel told me that. It's what it's all about, yeah.
The thing about you becoming a pilot is you are colourblind, which means you can't get a CPL, right?
No, it doesn't mean that. I'm also very weak in one eye, and don't fall a long way short of the commercial pilot standard.
Right. So how did you get that?
Well, I was pretty lucky. Peter Rowley, who owned Rowley Aviation, an absolute gentleman. He had connections back in those days in high places from his Air Force days, flying P-40s and Corsairs in the islands. And a lot of those acquaintances ended up in high places in the CAA. Neville Somerville was a friend of mine, a fellow pilot from Cheviot. He's older than me, and he was flying before I was. He was colourblind, and he was actually the first colourblind pilot in the world to get a commercial pilot licence. And Peter Rowley was great mates with the then Minister of Ag, Tom Shand, and he said to him, is there any way that we can get this guy a restricted licence to do ag work? Not having to land at night, not having to work control towers and lights. So they basically said, right, give him a test, fly him around Canterbury in a Piper Cub and see if he can pick out what crops are what. So they did that. And I think Neville told me he did that flight with the late Brian Antle, who was a big name in venison back in those days. And he was successful at that, so they gave Neville a waiver. So that precedent had already been set. My problem was the amount of letters that I had that said, Mr. Patchett, stop wasting our time and your money. You do not meet the commercial pilot eyesight standard. I had a very weak right eye, but there was nothing wrong with the eye. It was just that being at Molesworth in those formative years, I never got the opportunity to have an eye test and have a patch put over the other eye to make the lazy eye work.
Yeah.
So long story short, Pete Rowley wrote a letter to the then director and basically said the ag aviation industry would collapse if Ray Patchett didn't get a commercial pilot license. Not really, but and so basically I had to do a few special eye tests to ascertain my compensation and my peripheral compensation, and I was issued a waiver thanks to Pete Rowley.
Wow.
Don't think it would ever happen nowadays.
Yeah.
But, and so, yeah, I've been pretty lucky, really.
So your first flying job was with Pete Rowley?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
What aircraft did you start in?
In a Piper Cub.
Right.
Yeah.
What does flying... I don't know if it was underpowered, but you were probably overloaded. So effectively it was underpowered. I'm assuming that was a pretty good learning experience, because the underpowered planes I've had, the Pacer when we first got it, gutless as anything, short wings, but, that teaches you a hell of a lot about energy management and, how not to get into situations that you can't get out of.
Absolutely. Of course, we didn't know any different. I was ag flying, and that's all that mattered. But, the Cub, Pete Rowley had 4 of them. And the one that I started with a belly pack slung under the aeroplane in a tank. Couldn't really overload that one. You could only get 250 litres in it. But, of course, the drag of that tank was such that with spray gear under the wings and the tank and the pump, which was wind driven, the flight manual stated that if the temperature was over 17 degrees, you weren't allowed to fly it. It was pretty gutless, but I didn't know any better. They would get off the ground.
Yeah,
always get off the ground. They just wouldn't go anywhere. So you got very, very good at coaxing what little height you could get into a turn to be able to turn, almost file a flight plan to turn it around. But then I moved up onto one of the 2 hopper Cubs that they had with a hopper in the back, and then did my first 2 seasons in Canterbury, spraying out of paddocks, and got a pretty close look at a few fences doing that. And when I took over the base in Blenheim, the Cub we had here had a hopper in it, but I was operating off Omaka airfield most of the time.
Yeah.
So it's a big airfield. So we would always get airborne, but you'd do the whole season and never get over 200 feet. Because, it was
you just couldn't.
So gutless. And, we used to carry first load of the morning just on daylight when the air was cold. We'd get 410 litres off, which was a fair load. I mean, an aeroplane designed to take you and me and 50-pound of luggage. You had sort of 4 or 5 people in the back seat sort of stuff. So it was very, very tail heavy, and you'd fly it with the trim hard forward, the stick hard forward, and you'd leave the throttle at full throttle all day.
Wow.
And you'd fly off Omaka across to the other side of the Warrior Plain where a lot of the work was. And you'd descend by just pulling the power back a little bit, because the stick was already hard forward. And you had to be careful not to keep the power off for too long, because you'd land again. Not quite as bad as that, but yeah, you learnt. I remember when I started flying it, the Cubs had a fearsome reputation for killing pilots.
Okay.
When they had hoppers in the back seat,
because of the CFG?
The aft centre of gravity,
Yeah.
And they would flick.
Right.
Flick over into a spin if you got anywhere near the stall.
Mm.
And I remember Dave Bishop telling me what he was told when he started in a cub. And he said to Snow Gatehouse, he said, I'm pretty frightened of these things. And Snow said, never let the speed get below 60 with a load in, and never let it get more than a quarter of a ball out. Well, it would only do 65, and you had that ball glued there.
Mm.
So yeah, it taught you to...
Nothing like having to stick within certain parameters to keep you alive. And
Absolutely,
learn good skills,
and part of my training, because I trained in a cub by the late Barry Cowley, and he did a fantastic job. Looking back, amazing job of instilling in me what was required to stay alive. And part of the training was he gave me a big pile of Piper Cub Ag crashes, accident reports.
Okay.
And I mean, in 1966, they killed 6 pilots in a week, all from flicking off turns, getting fraction too slow, bit out of balance, and flicking over the top with nowhere near sufficient height to recover. So yeah, I treated it with a huge amount of respect.
I suppose in those very early days when you don't have the skills, it just comes automatically. You're just constantly thinking about it. But I guess soon enough, you just develop the motor skills that it just came naturally.
Absolutely. If we'd have had GPSs back in those days, I don't know how we would have got on.
Because you're focusing on...
Well, your whole thing was fly the aeroplane. I'm quite sure there was a few misses in the paddocks that never got chemical.
I think you talked about accident in BVJ when the engine quit off a marker.
Yeah, well, of course, that was my own fault. I had a big day spraying on the next day, so instead of putting it away in the hangar that night and all the drama of getting it out and getting it all set up, ready to go, I left it outside under the overhead water gantry where we filled it up. And I got out there in the dark the next morning, and I always left one full tank and one part tank. And so I opened the door, put a torch on the fuel gauge, and it was a glass sight glass, and there was a little P in there that used to float on the fuel. Of course, if you couldn't see the P, you would assume it was where you left it up the top. Well, in actual fact, it was down the bottom. Somebody, some real good disciple had decided he needed the fuel more than I did, and he'd drained it out overnight.
Right.
And of course, I did a water drain, and fuel came out the water drain, but I never undid the top and put my finger in it or put a dipstick in it. It was where I'd left it. I couldn't see it, and there was a wee bit of fuel, a reserve fuel in the other tank. So things were as I'd left it. I later found out that Pete Anderson, the flying vet, had his machine milked a few nights before when he left his out pretty much in the same place overnight. Anyway, so I thought, right, first load of the morning, it was cold and still. I was going to put a big load in, 410 litres, and away I went, heading off on 19 at Omaka, which is away from the town to the southwest. And I just got airborne, and I'm coaxing it around to the right to head across towards Rapara. And Graham Drury was on the tower, and he called me up and said, "Bravo, Victor Juliet, what's your present position? We've got a Tri-Islander coming in on the centre line." So I picked up had an old Dexter Fitzgibbons type Bakelite microphone hanging up there, and I picked that up, pushed the button, and the engine stopped. So I just said, "Engine's quit, I'm going down," and dropped it. And thought, you're not going to kill me. So I just held that pole hard forward, and you had to change hands to dump. And the dump lever was attached to a plywood block on the floor, and I reefed the dump lever open to dump the load, and the handle come out. And
Did it dump?
No, it didn't. It buckled up the plywood and broke a hunk out of the corner of the plywood, and here I am holding the dump lever. Anyway, so I thought, right, I remember looking at it. That cub was in knots, not miles an hour. And I well remember looking at 70 knots. You were staying at 70 knots because I just shoved everything right to under the panel forward. And I remember I just ran it on the ground, and I went through a fence, which was only a fairly flimsy fence. I knocked that down pretty quick. And then I come up to another fence, which was in someone's backyard. And I remember busting through the fence and up onto its nose, and there was a mound where they'd ploughed the paddock and they'd put the fence on, you know, they get that bit of a moulding where they'd ploughed it. Anyway, that was a hell of a jar in the undercarriage. As it went up on its nose, the dump, which was in the half-armed position, it tripped, and all this white pus came out all over the lawn. And there was a lady in the kitchen, and she must have been getting breakfast for her husband, looking out as this aeroplane comes busting through a back fence. And she's running around like a chook with no head.
What'd you say when you got out?
Oh, she was pretty upset. And anyway, I said, no, look, everyone, all right. And the aeroplane fell back down, and in due course, my loader driver brought the engineer who had arrived at work and said the old dad's just gone down over in the paddock. So they arrived over there and established that I'd run out of fuel on the full tank wasn't full at all. Mm. And so we unravelled the wire, which was ravelled round the propeller like a car tyre. And the fence was now down, so there was nothing stopping it. So we just fired her up and put some more gas in, and away we went.
Get back to work.
Yeah, and I think the lady's husband was in the Air Force. And I later heard he was a bit surprised that he could come and crash in someone's backyard and take off again without a court-martial. But, pretty lucky. Mm. Yeah. Mm. But, I mean, we laugh about it now. But, of course, the sequel to it was I'd told the tower I'd lost the engine and I was going down. And the last thing I thought about was ringing them up and saying, I'm down and I'm all right. And so they rang the police, and the cops' cars were running up and down the road. And then I see one charging up New Renwick Road, and thought to myself, what the hell's going on? And then it suddenly dawned on me, they're looking for me. So, I got into a wee bit of strife over that.
Some point, Rowley's had a bit of a downturn and you were laid off. And there was an interesting couple of years when you worked with Pete Vincent and Ian Garlick, I think, in the Speedlink. Can you just talk about how that came about? Quite an interesting story and cool characters to work with.
Well, yeah. The late Bob Gard was a great friend of mine and an ex-instructor of mine. He was one of the senior captains at Safe Air. And he rang me up one night and said it was the last flight across to Wellington that particular Bristol was going to make. They were retiring the Bristol at Safe Air. Would I like to come for a ride? And of course, hell yes, I'd love to. So after tea, we did a night run over to Wellington, and back in the co-pilot was Pete Vincent. And a couple of days later, I was out at the Aero Club, and I think Pete had been laid off because they were selling the Bristol and they were only going to run 2 Argosies. And I was chatting to him there, and because I got to know him because he was the co-pilot on that flight. And
is that where you first met Pete?
That's where I met him, yeah. And anyway, he asked how things were going, and I said, "Oh, we're pretty bad. We've all been laid off, and thanks to Roger Douglas." And I had a bit of a scheme. I was going to buy a Piper Pawnee and have a go on my own. And Pete said, "Well, I've got a bit of a scheme. I'm going to get a DC-3.
He's another ideas man.
Yeah, another ideas man.
Little did he know who he was coming up against.
Yeah. And I reckon we're going to cut some parcel freight. And I said, "Oh, yeah? How are you going to do that for?" "Oh, well, the railways." "Oh, right." He said, "I tell you what, why don't you come round to my place for coffee and you tell me about your scheme and I'll tell you about mine, and we'll compare notes." So anyway, great. So I went round there and we had coffee and decided his scheme had more future than mine. So he said, "Do you want to join me?" So I did. It was fantastic. Yeah.
Wow.
We had
crazy the people you meet, not knowing, and have become
yeah.
lifelong friends.
Yeah, and we ended up with 3 DC-3s, and I always remember I went to Wellington with Pete, and Pete was a very smooth talker, and we stood at this big skyscraper in Wellington, Alan Johnston House, I remember, and we went upstairs and said we had an appointment with Alan Wheeler, and he was the general manager of Passenger Business Group. Fantastic guy. And this big muscle-bound guy in a silver suit. It didn't look quite right. And he'd been an ex-train driver. He'd come up through the ranks. And anyway, we sat down and Pete opened his briefcase and he had all these business plans. And he just laid it on real good. And Alan's taking all this in and he orders us coffee, and the office girl brings us coffee in, and Pete's got all these plans there. And in the finish, Alan said, "So you're going to give me a better service than Safe Air, utilising an aeroplane that's 30 years older than the one they've just retired." He said, "Yep." And he said, "Go home and write me a letter." So we did. And we got a contract, yeah. So it was fantastic. Yeah, we had a ball.
So you weren't flying, you
No,
were doing the parcel side of it in Blenheim?
No, I was the loadmaster.
Right.
And I was going to go on and fly, but I think the catalyst to the problem was that's when I come up against my colour blindness.
So did you travel with the aeroplane and like unload
Yes.
and load at each end?
Yeah, I was in charge of the loading of the aeroplane, the weight and balance side of it.
And that was the start of Vincent Aviation, effectively, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was Pete's first venture.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
And our first captain was Neil Abbott. And I always remember Pete Vincent and I flew over to Wellington in a Cessna 180 and with a shovel and a crowbar to dig the pickets to tie our DC-3 down when it arrived.
Try doing that in Wellington now.
Oh, my God. So here we are out there in this rock-hard ground because it's all reclaimed and compacted. And this guy, this real athletic-looking guy coming across the tarmac with a shoe shine shuffle on, and he had a suit and a waistcoat. And I said to Pete, "Good God, we're in it here. Who's this coming?" And he said, "Oh, that's Neil Abbott, our captain." I thought, "Oh, right." He gets there. The first thing he does is grab the crowbar out of my hand and starts digging a hole. And I thought, well, he'll be all right. And he was. He was a great guy. Yeah, we had a ball.
Ian Garlick was part of that?
Ian, well, you never do anything in aviation without Ian. He was just a great guy. Yeah, just wanted to help. That's all he ever did was help people. And yeah, he was a great help, particularly when we started doing Newman's freight from Wellington into Blenheim. It was an early morning flight, and Ian he'd come and help us unload it and get the next load away before he started work at Safe Air as an engineer. But he did a hell of a lot to help me throughout my whole career. Ian did. It was a big loss when he died, yeah.
So then in 1993, you're back to ag flying. And
no, I went back to ag flying in 88.
Oh.
Laid off in
80.
I remember it well, 15th of September 1986.
Yeah.
We were laid off.
In 1993, you finished with Rowley's, and you went out
Rowley,
with a mate, Darryl Williams. You bought Rowley's?
Yeah. Bruce Evans was we were at that stage, we were down to, from 9 bases, we had shrunk, the company, Rowley Aviation, had shrunk, and Darryl and I bought Westport and Marlborough together. And we traded for the first year as Northwest Aviation.
And you only ran for 1 year like that?
That company ran for 1 year, yeah. And I wanted to buy one of these new GA200s from Gippsland Aeronautics, a little fat man, they nicknamed it. On the 3rd of March, 1994, I had the fortune or misfortune, whichever way you look at it, to roll my ag wagon up in a ball. And I had an insurance check. And so I wanted to go to Australia and order a new fat man because I had the ag wagon for top dressing and the Pawnee for spraying. And the fat man would do both.
Mm.
And it was a registered 2-seat side by side. But Darryl wasn't keen to invest too much money in the industry, which is probably wise at the time. And so he opted to run his ESO Westport, and I became Patchett Ag-Air. I started Patchett Ag-Air. 1993 we bought Rowley's out, so it was middle of 1994 when I established Patchett Ag-Air.
Yep. So you mentioned you took this brave step and went and imported a fat man.
Yeah.
Which is funny the way things happen because you made great friends with the designer, Pete Furlong.
Yeah, he was a great guy.
And I remember you telling a lot of stories about him, but one I remember is about the mock-up of the Airvan aircraft in his workshop or his garage.
That's right. Yeah.
And I seem to remember, was it either wood or cardboard?
That was cardboard, actually. Yeah. And funnily enough, and I mean, I'm guilty of this as anybody, rushing around doing things, never take a photograph of anything. And Pete was so enthralled with this aeroplane he was designing called the Airvan. And he showed me all through, the cardboard mock-up that he had made of it, and forgot to take a photo of it. Well, I did.
Oh.
And after they started, that aeroplane went into production, he was telling me that he had never ever taken a photograph of his mock-up. And I said, well, just as well I did. And he was over the moon, and I gave him the photograph of it, of the mock-up.
So you dived in head first, bought the aeroplane, and became the Gippsland dealer.
I remember when I got over there, I was pretty impressed with the aeroplane. The very first 3 were actually what they called the Fat Man, because they were modified Pawnees, which you'd cut down the middle and widened the fuselage and put another seat in a bigger hopper.
Right.
And used the same engine. It actually went better, carrying half as much again.
So that's sort of where the name came from.
Yeah, so that was nicknamed the Fat Man. What I ended up buying was the GA200, which was their own totally scratch-built new aircraft with a new type certificate, whereas the other ones had been supplementary type certificates of a Piper Pawnee.
Okay.
So they took what they learned from that and they built the GA200. The first one to come out was the It was a B model with 250 horsepower. And I remember I said to Pete when I got there, they had an order of 10 they were sending to China, and the last one was still there. And I said to him, well, can I have a fly of it? Because, I'd been carrying 500 kilos in the Pawnee with a 250 horsepower fixed pitch prop. And this had an identical engine. And I couldn't really see how you could carry 800 litres and go any good. And I certainly didn't want to go back to the Piper Cub days of struggling around. So he said, well, I tell you what, we'll put the hose in the hopper and we'll go and have a cup of tea and we'll fill it up with water. And the hopper was 800 litres. And I said, yeah, but it'll probably overflow. And he said, you won't believe me unless it does. So, righto, so we filled it up. And it had about 2 hours fuel in it. And now it had 800 litres in it. So I hopped in. And he goes around the other side. He said, no, I'm coming too. And I thought, hell, he must be confident in it, because I wasn't. Anyway, long story short, yeah, it carried us no trouble. So I ordered one on the spot, but I never got it until, that was in March of 94, and I couldn't get it till late October.
Was he a very a naturally gifted designer,
Very
sort
much.
of like a Burt Rutan sort of thinker, was he?
I think he built several home-built aeroplanes, like he was a fully qualified engineer, but he wasn't a design engineer. He was like a maintenance engineer, but he'd done a lot of things. He'd rebuilt a P-51 Mustang and flew it around the air shows. And he was a very good pilot. He built a pit special and won a lot of aerobatic competitions. He was just an aviation nut. And he had a very, very good idea of things mechanical. And he took what he learnt from building the Fat Man. And then he told me he got an audience with the late Fred Weeks, who was the guy, he was an American designer who designed the first forward load-carrying ag plane. It was called the AG-1. And Bill Piper saw this design. So it had engine, crash bay, hopper, pilot. Very, very crash-worthy, very safe. And of course, all the ag airplanes of the day were converted cabin airplanes with the hopper behind you and the engine in front, and a health and safety nightmare, really. And so Bill Piper said, with my money and your design, we'll both be rich. So he designed the Pawnee straight off that AG-1, which looked very similar to the Fat Man. But what he didn't tell Fred Weeks was that he was going to use Piper Cub parts. And that's why the first Pawnees that came out with 150 horsepower and 180 horsepower, they went down like flies. They were too gutless, too much drag. So, but when they put the 235 horsepower in them, they went really well.
So what was it that Pete got right about the GA200 that caused it to perform so much better than the Pawnee?
Well, that's a very good question. What he did a lot of things, but the basic thing he did was he tough tested a Piper Pawnee. Now, by tough testing, I mean they, like the wing, for example, they get lengths of wool and they tape them in the spanwise flow of the airflow, and they run masking tape spanwise across, and then they fly it in close formation with another aeroplane filming it. So it's basically, you can have a wind tunnel, and where the turbulence and the drag is would break the wool and it would flap around and it'd sit up and point forward, quite unbelievably, but it did. And so he worked out where all the draggy areas were on the Pawnee, and he streamlined them. And he
so
also
he designed, that whole wing was his design, was
yes, Yeah, and so it had a longer wing than a Pawnee, and it had lift flaps. The flaps on a Pawnee were totally drag flaps, and on the Fat Man they were enlarged the flap, and it was a very successful lift flap. So fattening out the cockpit and the airflow behind the cockpit, and shifting the engine 2.5 inches rearward, changed the centre of gravity, and yeah, it was a combination that just worked.
So when you got it back home, was it everything you hoped for?
And more, yeah, it was fantastic. And I remember Andrew Whelan, my opposition, we joined the circuit just in front of him one night, and he said over the radio, "What the hell's that?" I said, "It's a Fat Man." Anyway, we landed and we're at the fuel pumps, and of course Pete had given me the distributorship for the aeroplane, and so we pull up at the fuel pumps, and Andrew wanders over and has a look at it, and he wasn't overly complimentary about it, and I said, "Why don't you, where are you working?" And he said, "Tinnisfield." I said, "Well, why don't you take it in the morning and do your first 10 tonne with it?" He said, "Oh, righto." And the late Pete Francis was loading him. I waited. I said, "I'll just wait here till you come back, and then I'll go to work." And they came back, and Pete Francis climbed out and said, "Sold." So, Andrew really liked it. He ended up buying one himself. But,
so why aren't there dozens of them in the country?
Well,
if
of course,
they're so good. Why haven't they sort of taken over?
Well, because whether you're in transport or aviation or whatever, big is always better, And that's, in my view, sadly, will end up possibly being the demise of the top dressing industry. You've got to remember, Craig, we're the only country in the world that tips fertiliser on hills with aeroplanes. Aussie used to do a wee bit of it, but they don't do much of it now. And so the introduction of the turbine aeroplanes came in, the Cresco carrying 2 tonne and air tractors and that, fantastic aeroplanes. But so long as you got 25,000 tonnes every year to feed them. To replace a Cresco now, you're probably talking 3 million. So yeah, it was the bigger better thing, and but not all work gets bigger. Some of it gets smaller, and it gets varied. So I used to do crop spraying, suspension spraying, liquid fertiliser spraying, top dressing, poisoning of rabbits with pellets, seeding, urea on crops, and all the paddocks around Marlborough were all small, 4, 5, 6 hectare paddocks, and some of them, as you know yourself from over at Jim Rose's, vertical in and vertical out. And, a big heavy aeroplane just won't do it.
So, on that note, why did you go and buy a Drom then? Because is that not going everything against what you're just telling me?
It's a fair question.
So this was 1997, another first aircraft type into country, big radial, Polish. Was it Polish or Czechoslovakian? Polish.
It was Polish. It was marketed through Malex in the USA, but it was built in Poland. Had 1,000 horsepower supercharged radial. Boy, it could haul ass. It had a 63-foot wingspan, and it carried a legal load of 2.7 tonne. The reason that we bought that was we actually started off, we were going to buy a 502 air tractor just for our suspensions, because I wanted to get heavier and heavier rates onto the ground. It was Peter Furlong that I went over to Maroochydore up on the Sunshine Coast to look at a 502 air tractor. and I'd actually agreed to buy it. And I rang Pete Furlong from a motel room and said, I've just bought an air tractor. And he said, well, fantastic aeroplane, but for what you want, unbuy it. Come down here and I'll show you a big aeroplane. So I went down there and he took me over to Lee and Gather to Jimmy Foster's, and here's this brand new Drom. Now you could put a 502 under the wing of a Drom. But the thing that really intrigued me was it had a pump mount which was over to one side, and it had a round oil cooler in the middle. So I thought, why can't you hang another pump on the other side? No one had ever hung two pumps under an aeroplane, and 3-inch ones at that. So basically I tried it and I bought it. And the reason I bought it was it cost brand new engine, brand new aircraft, including shipping from America and 2 American engineers to assemble it, 12 months spare parts, and every tool you could ever think of, including a pocket knife and a soldering iron, all came with it. Unbelievable, for 350 grand, which was then about 50 grand more than a Fat Man. And Pete says, if it doesn't work, just send it over here as a firebomber. So it really was damage control. The air tractor was second hand, and it had been up in Malaysia doing fertiliser, and it was 750,000. So we rigged the Drom with two pumps, and it would pump 3,600 litres a minute of water. You could put fires out with it. And but the problem was we went into 3 years of drought, and those big jobs disappeared, and all the jobs were small jobs. So we'd take a Fat Man. And we did a couple of hundred hours in it, and we did a lot of ag liming with it, because it would empty a bin full of lime like you wouldn't believe.
Must have been a fun machine to fly.
Oh, I loved it, yeah. It was worth owning it to start it,
yeah.
Particularly if the tail was pointed at the opposition's hangar, because there'd be flames and smoke. But no, it was a fantastic aeroplane, big, but easy to fly, yeah. Heavy as all hell on the controls, but you didn't have to manoeuvre it hard, because it carried so much that you just take your time and lumber around the sky.
Like you say, a cool thing to do for a year or two.
Oh yeah, it's great.
Can we talk about some of the accidents you've told stories of over the years? Because, I mean, accidents in this industry seem to be a bit of a given, especially in years gone by, which is probably changing. But looking back and listening to your stories, I mean, they're quite funny in hindsight. So you mentioned briefly just before the ag wagon. What happened there?
Well, that one actually wasn't my fault.
Of course.
Never is. It was a stunning Monday morning on the 3rd of March, 1993. And it was the third load of the day, and it wasn't even a full load. I was building up to a full load, and I was working out of a paddock with a fence at either end of it. It wasn't an airstrip as such, but it was adequately long enough. Anyway, I got airborne with the third load, and I just got airborne, and at about 5 feet off the ground, something went bang, and it sunk. So the ag wagon had quite a light elevator and a very heavy hopper lever. So something had gone wrong. I didn't quite know what. So I dumped the load. and I pushed hard forward on the dump lever with the control stick still in my hand, and being quite light on the controls, you tended to pull back against the other, which pitched the nose up. And of course, I can remember seeing the nose sitting up there thinking it's not going to sit there for much bloody longer. And it dropped the wing, stalled and dropped the wing. And as the wing went down, as I passed over the fence, the wing caught a big concrete strainer post.
Oh.
And she cartwheeled down the paddock. But when it hit the ground first, it ripped the undercarriage, or one undercarriage leg out, and the hopper box completely off, which as it rolled back under, as it slid on its guts, it pulled the floor out of it. So all the soup was pouring out and coming up into the cockpit. And I'm thinking I'm on fire. Anyway, the bashing and crashing, because I'd smashed my teeth together, I remember. I thought I'd chop my tongue off. And anyway, it finally bounded round to the left and finally slid to a halt. And it was sort of sitting up like that, and I thought, you're not going to burn me, so I leapt out the door, and halfway out I got me ankle hooked in one of the in the lap harness, or the shoulder harness, one or the other, and I couldn't get out. And then I thought, what the hell's that racket? And what had happened, when it dived in, it bent the prop back right over the cowling, and of course the engine's still going at full throttle, and the prop's picking up these clods of dirt, firing them everywhere. And so I reached back inside and shut the thing off, and then scrambled out. And the old heart was going.
Super everywhere.
Oh, God, yeah. That was the end of that machine. But what had happened is the flap lever, that aircraft had a Robertson stole kit on it, which is an extra fat leading edge on the wing. And they had a bell crank that when you pulled the flaps down, the ailerons came down with it, so you had full span flaps. Really worked, really got off the ground. So basically I was flying on borrowed time, because I got off the ground early because of this stole kit on it.
Yeah.
And the knoll on the end of the flap lever, where you push the button to select your flap, there's a wee knoll on the other end that goes into a slot. Well, of course, it gets a hell of a lot of work, and it snapped off. Fatigue, it just broke. And the flaps all sprung off. And so it was going to crash back to the ground, and that's when I dumped the load, and it was me that caused it to stall. But it was either going to hit that concrete strainer with that wing or charge through it, one or the other. But so they wrote that machine off, and I had it well insured, which allowed me to go to Aussie and buy a Fat Man.
Oh, that was what instigated that.
Yeah.
The next one, which I remember is quite a funny story, is the Fletcher.
And the rabbit board truck.
With Rowleys.
Not overly proud of that one.
It was a long time ago.
It was. I had, at the time, the Marlborough District Council rabbit board poisoning contract. And we'd fed this particular job. You normally only fed them with carrots twice, and the third time you poison. Well, we'd fed this block 3 times. And the farmer, he was getting pretty desperate, because it takes several weeks. And he's got to be without that block of land. He can't have stock in it. So he called Sean Boswell, my mate, a good friend of mine now. He was the boss back then, and said, if you don't poison it tomorrow, I'm putting the stock back on. So they'd already invested in 3 feeds, a lot of money, which I'd done. And the airstrip was like landing on a football, and was narrow, and your wing sort of hung over either side of the ridge. And it was the middle of winter. and we'd just had 4 days of rain. And Fletcher's had a bad habit, particularly in the winter, of leaving 3 wheel tracks in particularly narrow airstrips where you can't shift across and land a bit different each time to look after the strip. And I had Bruce Peterson in with me. He was loading me at the time. Bruce went on to be very successful in his own company, Aerospread in Wairoa. But he just started because he had been head shepherd at Molesworth Station. And so I got to know him up there, and top bloke. Anyway, he was learning to fly because he decided he might want to be an ag pilot too, you see.
This sounds familiar.
Yeah. And so anyway, he said to me, now look, he called me Dave because everyone was Dave. And he said, look, Dave, I'll be watching pretty hard what you do. I've flown around this football and had a couple of goes, but I don't know how to actually go about landing on it. And I said, well, hang on tight, Dave, and I'll show you. So on the end of the airstrip, we had our loader was parked there, and then there was the super bin on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, we had the carrot cutter and the big bin that you put over the carrot cutter that held the carrots. And parked in front of that, on the right-hand side, was a brand spanking new Toyota Land Cruiser with a deck on the back. It was a double cab from memory, might not have been. Anyway, the boys had just got it the day before. It had 70 Ks on it. And we came into land and touched down at the start of this airstrip and rocketed up over the top. And I'm pressing the brakes, and then I realised the wheel ruts are all full of water because quite long grass on it. And of course, touching the brakes was accelerating it even faster. So I never had the presence of mind to shut the engine off. I just pulled it back to idle, but it's still 40 horsepower idling. And the all the paraphernalia on the other end's rushing up. And I remember yelling out to Bruce, you better hang on, Dave. We ain't going to stop. And I thought overshoot, and I thought, no, don't go near it. Keep that throttle shut and just take what comes. Well, my cousin, the late Les Neal, was leaning across the bonnet of this Toyota Land Cruiser, and he suddenly realised this thing isn't going to stop. So he dives over the bank out of the way, just as the right wing went straight into the bull bar on the front of the ute, then up over the bonnet, caved all the roof in, and then hit the night shooting frame that they used to lean across to shoot rabbits at night. And it stopped dead. And the rest of us turned into a frisbee. And round we went and straight into the carrot cutter. Well, it had a brand new 3-bladed prop on it. And Reg Taylor, the engineer, had said to me, this airplane's going to turn 20,000 hours old this week. Don't wreck it. And that ran through my mind when all the noise stopped. And I looked at Bruce and he looked at me, and one propeller blade had been ripped out of the prop oven and gone 50 feet in the air. And we're looking at each other and we're sort of nervy as you are. Next thing, bash, as this propeller blade came back down and caved in the last flat piece that was left on the airplane. And I said to Bruce, that's not how you do it. Well, we burst out laughing. It wasn't funny, but it was nerves, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it did a hell of a lot of damage to the Toyota and a huge amount of damage to the airplane. It twisted the whole frame. But yeah, I actually flew it off that airstrip because the engineer came up and they riveted patches here and there, and they bloody put wire through here and said, look, nothing over 60 knots, and just floated on down because it was just not that far up above Omaka Airfield, up on those hills to the south.
Yeah. Doesn't have to hang together for too long.
No, and just nothing over 65 knots. So, yeah, it was out of the air for quite a while.
Mm.
Never lived that one down.
It's good for us to listen to that story.
Yeah.
And then there's a couple of fatty crashes, which I sort of always thought, they're proactive crashes because you've chosen just to crash.
Yeah, they were weather-related when...
Not your fault.
Back in the day where they hadn't made a forecast that would turn me back, I hope if there's any young pilots out there who get to see this, they listen carefully.
Yeah.
If you suspect reasonably strongly in the pit of your gut that the weather's going to crap out, believe it will, and do something about it. We had been working on Banks Peninsula, and there was a southerly front coming up we were on the south coast, and the southerly front had been coming up all day. And Keith Bailey was my business partner at the time, and he was loading me, and the pressure was on. The front was rumbling up the coast. The wind was starting to get up, and I whipped in and said, "Look, mate, we're going to have to pull the plug. I'll get some fuel, and you'll have to pack up. I'll have to get off the south coast here, or we're going to be stuck because we're about 2,000 feet above the sea on this ridge strip." So we did that, and I barreled off, and the fog by now had come right up, and it was touching the hills, so I dived like hell down and got under it. And of course it started pouring with rain. And I turned right and headed into Birdling's Flat. And I'd only got about halfway into there and I just couldn't see anything. It was just pissing down rain. And by now there's about a 25 knot southerly blowing, pushing you up against the rocks. And I thought, I can't turn out to sea because I'll fly into the sea. So I turned out to the sea enough to be able to continue seeing all this foamy waves crashing on the rocks, and I turned back in downwind. And bloody near hit the rocks coming back round, and thought I'll head for Akaroa Head, go back and go round into Akaroa. Well, I only got about halfway to there, and that all closed off, and now I'm starting to panic. And it was a pretty torrid sort of a sea running, and white caps, and I thought I'll get one more turn back towards the coast because you can see again the white caps. And now here I am heading back towards Birdling Flat, knowing I can't get there, and there's nowhere to go, and having to push the panic back down in your guts. And thinking there's no way I'm going to go up through it. I'm not going onto instruments. That's never going to work with me. And I remembered thinking, I'd always sat eating me tea watching the 6 o'clock news with Louise, and I've always said to her, this guy's crashed and that one's crashed, and usually in bad weather. And I said to her, that'll never get me, because I'll do something about it. So I thought to myself, grow a pair and do something about it. So I'm not going in the sea, so I'm going to have to crash on the land. And just then there was this sort of dark cleaverage came up, and I thought, that'll be a gully, I'm going in there. Knowing there's nowhere along that south coast that you could land. I mean, I'm down at sea level. There's no way you could get up to where the airstrips were, up high. And so I crossed the beach, shut the throttle, and hung on. And a big macrocarpa tree came up. I thought, shit, roar over the macrocarpa tree. Now I'm getting into the gully, and I'm thinking there's probably a vertical waterfall in front of us or something. So I grabbed the red knob, shut the bloody engine off, and now I can't open the throttle. And then the side of the hill appeared, and it was quite a steep angle. And I always remembered, and it's funny, you go back to your original training. Barry Cowley had taught me, when he trained me, how to side slip along a hedgerow or a power line, rather than have to judge the wing against the power line, lift the wing above it, and kick the thing, fly it on its side. Only when you're light, only the last end of a clean-up run, fly down the hedge like that. So I thought, I'll just match the angle of the hill with the wing, and I'll plant it on the hill. So that's what I did. Bearing in mind, to do that, you've got full left aileron, full top rudder, and it's not going to stay there for very bloody long.
And no power.
And no power. So it's one movement, bang, onto the hill. Well, as it happened, how lucky can you be? I came down on top of a fence, landed right on top of it, and which slowed it down tremendously because I had 20 knots up my chuff as well. So the ground speed's probably 75 mile an hour, maybe 80. And I remember looking down at the lower wing, and there was a dropper off the fence going end over end over end, keeping up with me. And it slid down into the floor of the gully. Still had probably doing 55 knots. And then I saw the woolshed. It was Knobstronics woolshed, the one where I'd been spraying. And his ute was parked there. And I thought, I'm going to go all the way up to the wool table in this bloody shed. But wouldn't you know it, here comes a ditch. Fantastic. The wheels went into the ditch, pulled one leg off almost, spun around and went backwards through the fence and stopped. Wow, I couldn't believe it. I got out and kissed the ground, I can tell you. Wow.
And, but that decision probably saved your life.
Well, that's the thing. Yes, I should have known better. And it took more than that one to teach me as well, not to fly around in shit weather. But, I mean, yes, it was damaged, but Bruce Robertson from Timaru, the engineer, he came up. I did it on the Sunday afternoon, and Bruce came up and he rang me, I think it was on the Tuesday, and said, righto, well, we've straightened the prop and we've taken all the spray gear off and we've patched up the busted wing if you've got another undercarriage leg, and I'll change the leg and you can fly it back to Blenheim. So we did that on the Wednesday. The fence was down. We'd lifted it out of the ditch. It was still a southerly blowing. Gorgeous day. And it only took about 50 yards to get off the ground.
It's amazing that you could fly it out.
Yeah, flew it out. It actually didn't make excess. So I didn't make an insurance claim because I had the parts. So, yeah.
So then there was a second one.
Well, that was not that long after I'd got it back.
Same aeroplane?
Same aeroplane. They had a, I think it was a 60th anniversary do in Palmerston North. And Pete Furlong at Gippsland had asked me would I take the aeroplane and do a demonstration on the they were going to have a bit of an ag field day air show on the Sunday. So I had said that I would take it up there, so I put my wife in, and Louise and I headed off across the strait, heading to Palmerston North. It was a Friday afternoon, and as always, there's always a front in Cook Strait. So we get across the other side, and it's pretty shit, and we cruise up the coast past Paraparaumu, and Louise is saying, why don't we go and land at Paraparaumu? No, we'll be right. And of course, she's just a housewife. What will she know? But I said, look, no, we'll just carry on up the coast here. We've got the whole beach we can land on here, and we'll head for Foxpine. And I know Foxpine quite well, and we'll land there. So halfway to Foxpine, there's these light shafts start over Levin, and I said, oh, the weather's coming right. And so we'll just head across here towards Levin. Oh, she said, I think you should go to Foxpine and land there. And I said, no, we'll be right. Anyway, we're halfway to Levin, and the O'Hell Point there's coming sort of into view, and it starts raining again, and hard. It's pissing down. And of course, same as Banks Peninsula, the the mist and shit's going right to the ground. And I'm fumbling around with the radio trying to get the Palmerston Tower, which I think was 1206 from memory or something like that. And the blood pressure's coming up and the rain's louder than the engine. And I finally realised I'd flown into a corner again. I'm stuffed. I'm going to have to land. And I said to Louise, you better put your knitting down. This could hurt. She was fantastic, actually. Anyway, in we came over these bloody trees. And, of course, we're downwind, but you just can't see enough to go round and get into wind. There's a green patch in front, and we're going in there. And, of course, I touched down, and it was bloody downhill. It was a cockie's race, a dairy cockie's race, where he fed the main race to the milking shed. And there was this dirty, big, homemade concrete strainer post with about 4 fences coming onto it, and it was dead in line. And we're still honking. We're down there. Still got the tail up. And so I thought, I know. I kicked full right rudder and stood on the right brake because the grass is wet. And it wouldn't respond. It kept going straight ahead. So I give it a fistful of power, which only made it go faster. And into the strainer we went. Wow.
The wing?
No, full on, straight in under the prop, but slightly on Louise's side. And, of course, crunch. It came to a stop and flew up on its nose, and we're sticking out of the ground like a dart. And then crash, back down we go. And anyway, I scrambled out. Louise stayed there. She was okay. And I scrambled out, and I just had a brand new spinner and prop put on
from the week before.
And of course, this wires wrapped round and round and round my beautiful new chrome spinner, and I was that wild. I grabbed hold of the wire and went to pull it, and it was electrified. So it gave me a hell of a belt. So I let out this bloody F-bomb. And Louise said, pull your head in, they're still making bloody aeroplanes. And I thought, shit, if she can say that, I can pull my head in. So needless to say, when we got to where we were going, because Neil Matheson had to come down and pick us up, we walked into this hall to a slow clap. But it was quite funny, because I rang the Civil Aviation to report this.
That was very good of you.
Affair. Well, it was before closing time on a Friday, and so I rang them up and asked the lady, "Good afternoon, Civil Aviation Authority," she said. And I said, "Could you put me through to accident investigation? I want to report a mishap. One moment, please." And then this guy comes on, it's Civil Aviation Accidents, Nigel speaking. I said, "Nigel, it's Ray Patchett speaking." Patchett, Ray Patchett, that name rings a bell. Actually, I'm just dealing with a Ray Patchett on my desk right now, an incident at Banks Peninsula. And I said, "Well, look, if you change the date to today's and the venue to the OL and just put it through the photocopier," I just did it again. He wasn't impressed.
So dare say you learnt a lesson or two.
I don't do shit weather anymore. No,
yeah.
I don't. But 100% my fault. Totally.
You've trained 8 pilots over the years.
Yeah.
And that may sort of, to some, sound like a small number, but it's a big deal to train an ag pilot, isn't it? It's a lot of work.
Big responsibility, yeah, it is.
What's the key to training a safe and a productive ag pilot? Are there key things that you need to instill in them, to make them safe, but not so scared that they're not productive?
The biggest thing you got to have is the right candidate.
Mm.
Absolutely. I'd even say the right candidate's more important than the right training pilot, if you know what I'm saying. And that's why it's so important for employers to have somebody drive the loader for them.
Yeah.
For as long as it takes to evaluate the sort of person they are. But you've got to have somebody who, and I know, you know, in the early days they used to train them at 18, 19. I would never train anybody. It'd be a pretty exceptional guy that I would train under 25.
Right, just because they need a bit more maturity.
You need to, and that bit of self-preservation you don't seem to have as a teenager.
Yeah, that's true.
And learn to listen.
Did you have any near misses over the years that that kept you alive for the future? I remember at Smoko at Sound Zero one day you came in pretty white and scared, and I can't remember the details, but you'd given yourself a real scare. Were there many of those?
Yeah, there were. Yeah, particularly in the early days. As you get more experience, the fright per flight factor decreases, but it never goes away. Nigel may choose to tell you about a little incident he had where when I was training him, a particular place we were working in, I said to him, watch this, in the certain weather conditions, there's no air in here. It's an area of low pressure. And I remember flying in there in a Fletcher once, and it just kept sinking. I just couldn't get out. I got out, but not by much. And Nigel had been top dressing, I don't know, 5 years at least. And he rang me up and said, you remember that hole you told me about? I ran into it today. So there's lots of things out there ready to get you.
It must be really hard to send a new pilot out by himself.
It's a nervous...
knowing that there's so much they don't know. You can't pass it all on.
No, you can't. Peter Rowley once said to me that there's... it might sound corny, but it's so true. There's no substitute for experience, but good training will keep you alive long enough to get it. And, I think of the tragedies, Nigel Shearer, when he was killed, 17th of December 1976. He'd been going 3 weeks, hadn't been trained. He'd taken over from a guy who had an accident, had been going 2 weeks. I won't mention his name because he survived that, he's still alive. And Nigel's accident was when the CAA brought in the compulsory training. There were training options available before that, 1976. Berwick Delcombe's school at Wanganui was training them way before that, but it was optional. And I remember Murray Dunn, who owned Aerial Work Marlborough. He was the second owner. He'd bought it from the founder, Snow Gatehouse. And I was pestering the hell out of Murray for a job, driving the loader, just pestering him all the time. And in the finish and frustration, he said to me, look, Ray, someone's going to have to die around here before there'll be any movement. And he didn't mean it he meant it as he said it. Just, about 4 days later, Nigel was killed, and I got the phone call. So I went into the industry knowing full well that, it was going to be basically a monotonous job punctuated with seconds of sheer terror, as the old saying goes, and it does. And the frights never really go away. They get littler, but they're still frights just the same. And it's usually to do with wind, a funny wind.
Yeah. over the years, you became an expert in soil science.
Says who?
Well, based on what I've heard from you, whether it was true or not, I've got no idea. But
You don't want to listen to too much.
it sounded impressive. And I should be an expert too if I listened to and took in everything you said, but I can't. I can actually remember a little bit. But it's something you were very passionate about, still are, I'm sure. And I just wondered if we could discuss briefly a little bit about the pros and cons of fertiliser use in New Zealand and extensive fertiliser use. And if maybe there's any alternative ways of achieving the desired end result. There's an article I found called Challenges and Innovations in Fertiliser Technology and Spreading by Bert Quinn, who I think I've heard you mention.
Dr. Bert Quinn,
Quinn.
He established Summit Quinfos.
Written in 2019. I just want to read a couple of paragraphs. The last decade has seen a truly meteoric rise in the amount of nitrogen fertiliser, principally as urea, used on New Zealand dairy farms. Conversion of flatter sheep and beef farms, forestry and cropping land to dairy farms, and increased intensification of existing dairy farms has resulted in a massive swing away from reliance on nitrogen fixation by clover to the use of typically 200 to 300 kilos of nitrogen fertiliser per hectare annually, consuming over 550,000 tonnes of urea annually in the process. This growth in nitrogen use has led greatly to increased nitrogen loadings on New Zealand soils and to increased losses to the environment, both from fertiliser directly and from increasing losses from urine deposition. The resulting increasing eutrophication of New Zealand's waterways, despite increasing restrictions of direct stock access and other quick fix measures, is an increasing threat both to the country's actual environment and how we are perceived by overseas markets. In a few minutes, are you able to explain very simply the soil science around fertilizing, how the soil needs fertilizer, but over the problems of over fertilizing by putting on too much nitrogen?
It's pretty simple, really, Craig. The statement that the soil needs fertilizer is not actually correct. It needs fertilizer if you're going to try and make it graze more than it was designed for. That's the first thing. Secondly,
due to commercial
pressures. Yeah. One browsing animal every week or two going over a patch of land compared to trying to put a fence around it and make 5 live there permanently, sort of style. So of the things that we can play a role in with respect to soil production, nitrogen is the biggest bang for your buck. And that's what Bert's talking about. And nitrogen fertiliser does pretty much what nitrous oxide does to an engine. You win the race, but you won't run another one. Nitrogen, chemical nitrogen particularly, that is not fixed by clover. Clover is a natural fix.
Being the method of taking it out of the atmosphere and converting it into some sort of format that plants or animals can use.
Yes, and that's nature's way of fixing nitrogen. The other way is lightning. And you might not think that fixes much till you see a map of the lightning strikes all over a country taken over a period of time. And there is nitrogen in rain as well. That's why rain makes lawns grow much better than the hose. But the problem is the chemical nitrogen is highly mobile in the soil, and it leaches like hell. And it's a negative. It's an anion, and all your nutritional ones are cations. calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, and they attach to, so you've got a positive, negative bind, and when the highly mobile negatively charged nitrogen leaches out through the soil into the waterways, it takes nutrition with it, therefore lowering the pH as well. And the biggest...
And damaging the waterways.
And it's growing all kinds of weeds that never used to grow, and all the rest of it. And there's all sorts of studies as to people's health problems surrounding around overuse of nitrogen, which we won't go into because I'm not a doctor. But the biggest downside, if you like, of pumping the New Zealand hill country production, which has kept the country's economy going, has been the erosion of the soil pH by using salt-based fertilisers. And the suspensions I talked about earlier were a chance to take rock-based products, like in their elemental form, reactive phosphate rock, lime, dolomite for magnesium, elemental sulfur, and grind it to flour so that it doesn't need chemical treatment to have it give up its elements in the soil in anywhere near an commercially economic time period. But of course you can't get it out of the hopper, so you mix it with water and pump it out. Those rock-based suspensions, let's just say a hell of a lot healthier for the ground.
And Bert actually said this further down in his article. He said, leading the way with experimenting with alternative aircraft designs and spreading technologies was the incredibly innovative Ray Patchett of Marlborough. Ray developed and patented new self-cleaning fertilizer suspension booms for fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters.
I didn't know that article was there. Well, good on Bert.
Yeah. Now, what I remember, just want to get onto the suspension boom, what I remember from the smoko room lessons, the lessons of Razor, about suspension was it's a very thick, much thicker than a simple liquid because you're mixing this flour with it.
It was porridge.
It was like porridge.
Yeah.
The advantages were it didn't leach like water or like a liquid.
Or like chemically treated fertilizer.
The disadvantages, one being it was so difficult to disperse.
Yeah.
That was it. Fair enough.
Mix and disperse. You had to
because it kept blocking
specialist equipment. Yeah.
So this is what led to your invention.
Yeah.
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 So you've said about why you put all the effort into it. Can you again very simply explain how your invention works, and maybe what would be interesting is the process of developing it, you know, where you started and how that sort of trial and error process worked.
Well, pretty simply, it was no problem when the stuff was pumping and moving. So we designed our own pumps with special volutes and special impellers driven by 5-bladed cockpit pitch adjustable propellers, which are commercially available. 3-inch plumbing compared to your normal crop spraying of 1.5 inch to 2 inch. Butterfly valves instead of ball valves. You couldn't use a ball valve because it's a shoulder with you're pumping sandpaper. So it's a shoulder with arthritis, if you know what I mean, a ball valve. So we use stainless steel rubber bedded butterfly valves to turn on and off and back to agitation. Fierce agitation in the hopper. So when it wasn't pumping out the boom, it was circulating around, keeping the floor of the hopper clean. So if you had to dump it, it hadn't settled out. Because if it settled out in the bottom, more than one man lost his life doing suspensions because he couldn't dump the load. And when it got to the boom, that's where the tricky part came. Because, as I say, if you just flew around with 14 millimetre holes, it would just keep falling out. The trouble is you get to a main road at the end of the block or a school full of lawyers' kids and you've got to turn around. And you best not be putting any on them. So it needed to shut off when you wanted it to shut off, but it needed to start when you wanted it to start. And that's where we had all the problem. With the vibration of the aeroplane flying, it would settle it out in the boom in a quicker time than it took to turn the aeroplane round. So one day I made the comment to Keith Bailey, who was my business partner, who had owned a high country station. He had a lot of input into where we took this suspension, huge amount of input. And I said to Keith one day, wouldn't it be good if you had a little man standing there with his finger in it, unblocking the bloody hole every time you wanted to spray it? And that's when I thought, actually, I know you can do that. And so I did. And very simply what it was a round. You couldn't have streamlined shape, which is good for aerodynamics because it was no good for fluid dynamics. So I had a round boom, which was 1.5 inches in diameter. Then I had something like 15 aside, 15 mil holes, reasonably simple in the bottom, with had a seat, like a valve seat, welded to it. Then I had an axle running behind it and air-operated Kinetrol valves, which would roll that axle backwards and forwards. And welded to that axle, I had these fingers with an end on them like a plumb bob that went up inside the hole. And they had a seat on them which was punched with a leather punch out of fab foam. So when you push the button on the spray lever to shut the boom, you shut the boom and then shut the flow off at the same time. The button's on the top of the stick. It would close that finger would ride leading into the airflow while you're pumping it out, and when you shut it, it would come around, push up into the hole, and the washer would seat it, and it would sit there sitting inside. And of course, as you're turning around, the product would settle out and solidify. And as you come in on the run, cross the fence, spray on, and bang, hit the button, and it would bang, rip the hole clear. Each time. Worked absolute treat. And I remember we sold the patent in America and we sold it in Australia. And I had patents in 7 countries, I think, in New Zealand. And we canned all those because they were costing too much money to keep going. And I remember the patent lawyer, an old chap called Colin Hadley, real good guy, and he once we'd done all the official stuff, he said to me, I'll meet you downstairs in that restaurant across the road there, and I've got a wee bit of free advice for you. And so we had lunch down there. He said, now I've been 15 years living in Europe protecting blokes in sheds inventions just like yours. He said, you've got a good strong patent there. He said, my advice is that you hope that somebody copies it that's got less money than you. One letter from us has him desist. It's now been proven under the law. Sell it as fast as you can, because you'll never make enough money to keep ahead of the people that have got more money than you that want to copy it. And so that's exactly what we did. We sold it in America, we sold it in Australia. I sold out of it here in New Zealand, and we closed the other countries down. So
I see there's a wee bit on an Australian company's website called Rowley
Rowley work. Yeah, Lindsay Keenan.
And they said the application equipment, talking about suspension, was developed and patented by Ray Patchett, an aerial operator from New Zealand. The application system that Ray produced over 10 years resulted in the ability to apply finely ground Naturally occurring rock-based elements such as lime, gypsum, dolomite, elemental sulfur, reactive phosphate rock, and a wide range of trace elements. The system allows for the addition of microbiological stimulants and seed and can all be incorporated in one pass, reducing application costs significantly. The components are applied in a wet format, minimizing off-target losses that would be expected when using powders. What was the process of developing the patent like? Was that painful or time-consuming, or actually getting the patent? I mean,
No, it wasn't too bad, Craig. It involved probably 4 to 5 trips to Wellington,
right?
To sit down with the patent lawyers and go through it. The biggest thing you've got is to get the patent lawyers in tune with. There's 2 sides to a patent. There's the teaching and the prior art. That's the legal terms for it. The teaching is why you would want it and what circumstance you'll use it in. And the prior art is the drawing of the device itself. And Colin Hadley said to us, there's something patentable about a glass of water, but how strong a patent it is will determine whether it survives. And so he said, for us to do a good job, you've got to implant in us what it is that you're requiring this thing for. So there's 2 sides to your protection in a patent, which, to be quite honest, I find is nowhere near as powerful as a trademark or a like I remember in Palmerston North on the news once, a shop opened up on Monday morning called Harrods. By Thursday, it was gone. It's a copyright. Patents, you'll end up, it wasn't getting the patent that was difficult, it was protecting it. And we had more than one court case over that too. Right. The advice that I would have anyone considering a patent is check out copyright first. It's a lot cheaper. And make sure that your patent lawyer, like we were lucky, ours, they were great patent lawyers, and they really took the time to quiz the hell out of us to find out exactly why you would want this. Well, you'd want it to have a healthier, I mean, I won the 2002 Marlborough District Council Rural Environment Award for that system.
Okay.
And it's a desirable system that's being requested more and more nowadays. But of course, the other side of that, it's all very well to have the gear and the will and the expertise to apply it. You've got to get the material. And the company that used to grind for us has stopped doing that now because, I mean, we ended up with trucks going in the vineyards with it and Fruit Fed, the big stock firm, they promoted it and it went a long way. But then the power of the chemical fertiliser industry basically buried it in a nutshell. And I gave up in the finish.
Do you mean buried suspension?
Yeah, buried the whole thing. You see,
without getting too complicated.
Yeah, the whole thing is that they didn't believe in liquid fertilisers, the fertiliser industry, much, because you're not getting enough product for your buck. And I couldn't argue with that, and I never intended to argue. If somebody wanted old goat's ears spread, where do you want them, sort of style. But by admitting that suspensions were any good, they're admitting liquid fertiliser. But you see, the difference is being, I was trying to match the application rates, kilos per hectare on the ground, that the rest of the fertiliser industry were, and we achieved that.
It seems like a shame that it's just not available.
It was 25 years too early.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
And now, particularly on the West Coast, since the various governments have restricted the amount of phosphate and particularly nitrogen that can be put on, more and more farmers on the West Coast have rung me, do you still do that suspension? Because you see, reactive phosphate rock is not chemically treated and it doesn't leach. Yeah.
Another one of your innovations was your self-loader. Was that around 2010, maybe a little bit before?
Yeah.
You won the E.A. Gibson Award at the Royal Aeronautical Society for that.
You have been busy.
You said it's like all innovations. You don't invent things to get awards. You invent things because you need them.
Yeah.
So why did you develop that? I know, as we were talking about over lunch, people said, well, how did you get the truck out there? And but there was obviously a reason for it. And how did that work?
Yeah, people could not, if you just tell them, look, I just made a loader that's, I can sit in the plane and load myself. That conjures up all kinds of, how the hell would you do that? Have you got a big gantry or something? No. How do you get it to the farm? I drive it. Well, who drives the plane? I do. Well, at the same time, no. If, in case you haven't noticed, it never stops blowing. And in any 10 days, on average, you might get to fly 3. The rest of the time, you can go take the truck out, which had a big fertiliser bin on the back of it, just like a fert spreader. You'd put 12 tonne in it, either with the farmer's tractor, and you discounted him for that, or my WA-70 Komatsu I used to tow on a trailer, and you'd throw 12 tonne up, you'd roll the cover over, you'd unfold it, had a big high-ab crane on it. That high-ab crane was a 166 high duo, fully automated crane, and it would take basically a tonne out to 13 metres. And so you needed a cup chain because a V-belt wouldn't take it up 50 degrees. It would all fall off. So it had to have a cup chain like an old gold dredge, which went up. The bucket was exactly 800 litres, same as the hopper.
So you can't overload.
You can't overload it. And what you do is you could stand a kilometre away if you could see it and roll the crane round. You got the bucket on the end of it, pull it up under the chute until it touched the chute. And the chute had a spring on it so you could bash it without breaking it. So the sock would sit that far off the ground, the sock on the bottom of the bucket. And as it loaded it, it would sag, everything would flex down to where the bucket would come away from the cup elevator. So as soon as I came into land, the truck would be idling, and it's a tailwheel aeroplane. So as soon as the tailwheel's down, I don't need the stick in my hand anymore. So I would just steer it with my feet as normal and use the differential brakes, pick up the remote off the loader driver's seat, hit the latch, and watch for the puff of smoke. It'd go from idle up to 1600 revs, which was its working revs. Poof, you could see, oh, yes, she's working. And you'd just do that with the 2 levers. So you'd swing it out and up, and it'd come right round 90 degrees and sit there. And as you pulled round under it, you'd open your hopper and pull the trigger on the hopper lever, and a pin would lock the hopper lid open. And you'd just sit there and you would bring the bucket down into because the hopper hole was right in front of your windscreen. You drop the sock in there, and then came the tricky bit. You open the butterfly. It had 2 butterflies that would open, just like a top dressing loader, and the fert would accelerate in there. So as the bucket weight unloaded, the crane would want to spring up. So what you'd do is you'd get very good at it. You'd push down to hold it down, and the more you opened, the more you pushed down, and it would stay exactly where it was. Just don't stay pushing down when it ran out.
A hole in the hopper.
And it worked an absolute treat.
And then when you go away flying, it filled itself up.
Yeah, and you just put it back round under the chute, back under, and latch the second button that I hit it, and that would start the cup chain going. And it had a timer on it. And the timer was out of an X-ray machine. And you could, depending on what you were doing, you would set it up in the morning, just for the moisture of the day and all the rest of it. and you'd say, all right, I'm doing 5-minute trips today, so I'm going to set it at 2.5 minutes. So I set it at 2.5 minutes, and I'd just see, oh no, that's not quite enough. It's not quite full. So 2 3/4 minutes. Yep, that's perfect. Now, an unintended consequence, which was fantastic, was I hadn't thought of this, but when the oil's cold in the morning, like when you first start top dressing in the morning, if there's a lot of dew in the grass and the ground's a little soft, and whilst the air's nice and cool, the aeroplane doesn't accelerate as well in wet grass. And after about 3 loads, the prop's blasted the water out of it, and you can go up a couple 100 kilos quite safely. So what would happen is you'd take your first load, and the oil, you'd set it at, say, 2.5 minutes, and the oil's a bit thick, so it would only give you about 650 kilos. And that's good. So away you go with your light load, and then you'd come back in again, and you'd get about 720 next time because the oil's warming up. And the third one, you'd get your full load, should be peaked to the top, and it didn't need a weight scale. It was a timer, and you could see as you put it. Well, you couldn't overload it; it would be all over the ground. So it worked an absolute treat, and I probably put 20,000 tonnes through it. But it didn't get sold into the top dressing industries because everyone thought I was a bit. And I remember the CAA said to me, well, now we've got a problem with this. And I'm thinking, yes, someone's complained. Because, of course, a lot of people couldn't compete with it. I didn't have to pay a loader driver. And admittedly, if I was doing 20,000 tonnes a year, you couldn't do it either without a loader driver helping you. And the CAA said, now, how are you going to report? See, if you've got a loader driver and you go arse over head, he rings up someone and says, Ray hasn't come back. So I don't know if we can allow you to do this. And I said, oh, right, okay. Well, I had an answer for that because what I'd done is I'd wired in a satellite phone on the same timer. And what you did was it was your SAR time, see, search and rescue time. So if you're going to be doing 5-minute trips, I'd set the wee dial on the SAR time at 7 minutes, say. And it was always in your head, you better get back there. Otherwise, you could program 6 phone numbers it would ring. And it would ring the control tower and say, and I'd already briefed the controller on what this thing, if it ever rings up and says Ray hasn't come back, this is what, one rang your wife and one the local helicopter operator. And they were most impressed with that because, as I said...
Maybe that shut them up.
Well, particularly when I said it's a satellite phone, because I said, you tell me...
Even if you had a loader driver.
If you had a loader driver with a cell phone, there's no reception on most of the airstrips.
No.
And they had to agree that that's right. So, yeah, no, it worked very well. I remember doing 90 tonne in a day, in a 12-hour day on my own, and I was the only one on the airstrip. Amazing. So it really did work well. Yeah, I enjoyed working it.
In 2015, you decided to get out of the industry and you sold your business to Nigel and Nikki Griffith.
Yep.
It must be hard finding someone to buy a business like that.
Well, I didn't find him. Nigel found me. And
certainly
I often,
seems like it's, a match made in heaven.
Well, it was. And they're just a fantastic couple and so easy to work with. And I remember saying to Nigel, you do everything you say you're going to do. I'll do everything I say I'm going to do, and we'll all just get on just fine. And I have to say, he was fantastic. Great pilot. He was easy to train because he had a great pair of hands and he'd done a lot of flying. And he said to me once, you know, I realised this when he first started. He said, all the flying I've done up till now, and he'd done a lot of bush flying, will go nowhere towards knowing what I have to know. And I said, no, mate, it'll go everywhere to where knowing to what
But
you
that
have
shows
to know.
sort of a humble attitude towards it.
Yeah, no,
doesn't it?
he was. I always remember the first day we went out, and we were going on to a hill strip with a big bank at the end of it, and there was a bit of northeasterly blowing over our left shoulder, coming up our chuff. Not too much, but about 12 knots. And I said to Nigel, right, do a run onto the strip, down low, but just don't land. And just see how much the wind's affecting it at the end as it comes up the bank. And he said, yep, no, that looks all right. And I said, you sure? He said, yep. I said, do another one, go a little bit lower this time. So he came round, he did another run up there. Yeah, no, it's all good. I said, right, there we go. And he went in, and of course, when you get right down onto a bench strip, the wind's coming up like a wave breaking, and it lifts you up. And then it dumps you. And if it's fairly short strip, you can't brake if the wheels aren't on the ground. And so we came in there, and it did exactly that. And you don't really know that until what I was going to do was point it out to him. But I thought, no, he'll probably learn more if I don't.
As long as you don't end up like Dave Bishop.
Yeah. And no, what happened was she pitched up like that. Of course, it's crosswind as well, so the aeroplane swung, and Nigel's trying to hold that wheel down. And, of course, you can't brake on the right wheel because it's still off the ground to swing the nose back and carry on up the strip instead of into the bank on the side. And I remember grabbing and stamping on that, whack that wheel down, stamp on the brake, and we stopped about halfway up the strip. And Nigel looked at me and he says, next time you say, are you sure? I'll be listening. And that was what was good about Nige. You know, it wasn't there to see who was the biggest hero or anything like that. He was there to make sure he got home every bloody night. And he was a bit older, you see. He had that mental maturity. He had the business acumen because he was running a very successful business. A great pilot, great understanding of the whole thing, and a bloody good listener. And a very honest guy and very generous guy, and so was Nicky. So, yeah, it was made in heaven. So I fell on my feet when they came along. Otherwise, I'd have had to just sell the gear off and shut it all down.
You got out, obviously, you retired still alive, but you once said to me that, I might have got this a bit wrong, out of all the pilots, the students on your CPL course, you're the only one still alive. Was it
No, that wasn't quite what it was, Craig. It was when Barry Cowley trained us, me and the late Garth Nichols. He was my best friend from the era. And he was loading, he'd loaded several years from Marlborough helicopters and then joined Rowley Aviation as Darryl Williams' loader driver in Westport. And very, very good friend of mine. And so when Pete Rowley said we were both to be trained, of course, we never came down for 3 weeks. We were on cloud nine. We were going to get trained. And Barry Cowley was appointed to train us. So when he finished our training, because we stayed in the Plough Hotel in Rangiora on the company, and we would go out flying in a cub each day. We had a ball, I tell you. And when Barry signed us both out, we had a big party in the Plough Hotel. It was our passing out party, if you like, and there was 15 came to that party. And they were all pilots, not trainees. We were the only trainees. And for some time now, some years, I've been the last one left. They all got killed except one guy who was at that party, the late Colin Bint, helicopter pilot, who I had huge respect for. He died of leukemia, and the rest were killed in accidents, including our training pilot, who was flying the Convair 580 that came out of the sky over Otaki at night with freight on board some years ago.
Yeah, I was talking with Keith Nailon in the interview we did a month or so ago about the accidents in the venison and the top dressing industry, very similar rates.
Yeah.
It's hard to find definitive stats about this, but just a few numbers I did find. In the 1970s, in that decade, there were 270 ag stats, accidents and 25 deaths. In the 2000 to 2011 decade, there were 13 deaths. And in 2010 to 2020, there were only 4 deaths, but still 51 accidents. So obviously, you know, it was pretty bad back in the day. Something has been done to improve it. What do you think what are the main reasons of accidents in the ag industry over the years, and what's the main cause of it getting better? If you were to generalise, I know there's a lot of answers.
I think the main cause is the ag industry is allowed, because the aircraft are fitted with a jettison, provided that the jettison outlet and the material you're sowing can meet the dump requirement, which is 80% of the load in 5 seconds, you're allowed to operate legally at a 31% overload from the manufacturer's gross takeoff weight. Unfortunately, the race to the bottom, since the industry was deregulated on price, the race to the bottom has said in many occasions the only real profit is in the overload you've got over and above the legal one. And so overloading is probably the biggest contributor to all ag accidents.
But, I mean, obviously, if you had a long enough strip, having a heavy aeroplane is not going to be unsafe. It must be a factor of 2 shorter strips for that weight as well.
Yeah, but you've got to remember it's more about just getting off the ground. You've got to get it up and into Dead Pilot Gully and back out again. That's not the only cause of ag accidents, but it's you probably find it's not too many from mechanical failure.
So how's the industry improved the accident rate then?
Design of aircraft.
Higher power-to-weight ratio?
Much higher power-to-weight ratio. Aircraft like the Cessna Ragwagon, the Pawnee, the Fat Man, the Air Tractor, the Dromader have all got their Fred Weeks's combination of engine, crash bay to take the engine, hopper and pilot. There's a lot to crumple before you get it. The ones that haven't, the 400 Fletcher, which you're the meat in the sandwich, made worse so with the installation of the 400 horsepower engine, because the original 300 Fletcher and 225 Fletcher cockpits were very, very strong. They had big folded beams right through. The engine sat in a bed like a car, so they had a chassis. But when they put the 400 engine and the big 3-bladed prop on, it was too heavy, so they cut all that out. And so now you had a 32 thou skin between you and the firewall. Well, with that big 720 cubic inch, 400 horsepower, 8-cylinder engine and that big 3-bladed prop, the cockpits would smash in half. You'd only need to hit a track with the nose wheel, and it would break the cockpit in half, and you are now the front of the cockpit. That design concept was carried on into the Cresco, but you didn't see anywhere near the accidents in the Cresco because it had so much power. It was a turbine, it had 750 horsepower. carrying 2 tonne, but they still. I remember going for a ride in a Cresco with a full load in it, 2 tonne, me and the pilot. I couldn't believe the thing. It was climbing like it would almost outclimb what I had empty. They were a great airplane if you had the work to feed them. So I think the answer to your question is mainly overloading for the circumstance, whether that be an underload off one strip is a big overload off another one because it's too bloody short.
There's always work to be done, but is there still a way to go, in terms of improving the ag accident rate? Is there more that can be done?
Well, I think the training is way better than it ever used to be. There never used to be training in a lot of circumstances, not everyone. The aircraft design is made to do the job. Centre of gravities are always in the right place, whether it's empty or loaded, because the hopper's placed over the CFG. The power-to-weight ratio, as you say, is dramatically improved. GPS can be viewed as a great aid for the pilot and accuracy of spreading, but I've always said they're also a distraction. And I wonder how many unexplained accidents were GPS accidents. But by nature, if you're going to whiz round the countryside at up to 100 feet, a bit more, at 120, 130, 40 miles an hour.
There's minimal margin for error.
There's not a lot of margin for error, but I never ever found it on the edge of the seat or anything like that. I never found it, split second reaction time required or anything like that. It flows along quite, I don't want to downplay it, but the big dangers that I saw was, I think I might have clobbered 12 fences in my time. Went through 4 sets of power lines. So lucky. I had a very close friend of mine, young George Anderson, hit one wire and it took his life. So not so much wire strikes top dressing as spraying, but there's not a lot of fixed wing spraying done now. Most of it's with helicopters.
You're talking about training, and you mentioned that ag flying is all about getting on and off the ground in New Zealand. And something you said is that you would absolutely recommend learning to use airstrips for all pilots, regardless of what type of plane they want to fly. The pilot who landed an Airbus A320 on the Hudson River in 2009 demonstrated how those skills could save lives.
Yeah.
Do we need to go back to basics with our general pilot training industry, not ag pilot, just general PPL stuff, and teach much more basic stuff like strip flying and
yes, absolutely,
sort of bush flying skills?
Absolutely, we do.
Why is that so important?
If you were to get an experienced mountain flying instructor likes of Carlton Campbell or who operated down around the Southern Lakes for years, or Sue Cronfield from the Aero Club who's done a huge amount of mountain flying, or any ag pilot that's worked pretty much anywhere in New Zealand, because it's all about hills and wind. We're broadside on to the prevailing wind, the whole country. It's a whole different ball game when you're getting below the ridge tops. And it can be much more advantageous. You get a much better ride. You can easily work out, like air is one molecule different to water. So if you're a cockabully living in a bloody fast-flowing stream, you soon learn which side of the boulders to go on. And that's pretty much the same. And I've done some work with my grandson in our private aeroplane. taking him through some fairly big country and some fairly strong wind, and getting him to fly and from one ridge to the next shoulder to the next shoulder, and we've remained in the upgoing air the whole way, and he's amazed. Oh, this is great, and I don't mean right in the weeds, with a big safety margin really, but and the strip flying is if you can't do, as you put it once, a stabilised approach, and put the aeroplane on the ground exactly where you want it. If you can't do that, you're a passenger. And the aero clubs, they run competitions for spot landing, and that's going a long way towards it. But the healthy bastards, bush pilot competitions that we hold here at Omaka that Dr. Dave Baldwin so generously sponsors, tremendous advances forward, in my view, too. I mean, you look at the standard, you might have 30, 40 aeroplanes competing on the one day to all land on a spot, and the whole lot put it within 5 metres.
It is amazing.
It's incredible.
And then you go to any airfield on any day, and most planes will be landing within several hundred metres.
Yeah. And they come in and they're too fast. You can see from the car park that the nose is too low and it's coming down. They're not under a stabilised, controlled situation where the nose is level or slightly above, and they're holding the speed, and they balloon and they drift and float, and it lands when it's ready. And you go on a cross country somewhere, and you've got your family and wife and kids, whatever, and it's blowing its butt off, as it always is in this country. The passengers are all thinking, well, he's nice and licensed up, and what have I got to worry about? And I'm absolutely certain the Turner family that took off through the Southern Alps some years ago now, never ever been found. They rang Richard Rayward and asked, and he said, forget it, all our airplanes with professionals that do it all day, every day, are on the ground. Even the birds are walking. But I know they had a go. And the documentary I saw pegged the guy as an experienced pilot. He had 300 hours. Not experienced at all in those conditions, in that terrain. And sadly, the whole family were lost because of it. That's one of my pet hates.
You've owned over 30 aircraft. It's actually a crazy number. Yeah. Including a Hughes 300.
Had two 300s.
Two 300s. And your gorgeous 1956 tail dragger 172 at the moment. Yeah. And a gyrocopter.
Yeah.
Which I know, people look sideways. Why the hell's he got one of those? What did you enjoy about that?
Well, when I sold the 300, and why did I sell the 300 if I loved it so much? Well, you can either have a 300 or money. You can't have both. God, I missed it. Rotary wing is fabulous. And so I started looking into these gyrocopters that cost about the cost of a ride-on mower to operate. And I went for a ride in one, and it just blew me away. So then I sat thinking about it, and everything on a helicopter that'll kill you does not apply to a gyrocopter. And then I started reading the stats on gyrocopters, and then getting some truth in behind it. Why do gyrocopter accidents happen? And there are, like anything, do's and don'ts. And so I wanted one that'll really get off the ground, one that was strong, with a great reputation. And the Sportcopter M912 that I purchased, was single-seater, was fully certified for commercial cattle mustering in Australia. And every engineer that ever saw it could not believe how well engineered it was. And It did way more than I thought it would do. Fabulous machine. And I remember a young instructor said to me once, and I never forgot it, he said, "It's not that I don't like gyrocopters." He said, "I just don't like gyrocopter pilots." And that said it all. Every corner cutting, anti-establishment, anti-system person that wanted to fly buys a gyrocopter.
Or did in the old days. I mean, it's very different now, isn't it?
Yeah, or did. And, of course, as I used to say, I mean, my son's an airline captain, so he knows a lot about aeroplanes and aerodynamics. He wouldn't even look at it. It wasn't to be discussed. But no, Craig, I loved it. It was fabulous. And the only reason I really sold it was the guy that bought it had pestered me for a year to buy it. And I had the odd health issue, and being on aspirin and all that thins your blood. God, I feel the cold. And it's very cold. Even though it had a windshield and a roof, it was very, very cold. So it was really only 3 months of the year you could enjoy it. And I wanted to do some other things, so I sold.
And there was a very sad ending to that.
Oh, very sad, tragic. And in some ways, much what I've just said, really. The guy that bought it was a farmer. He was in his early 60s. Hell of a nice guy. I'd known him as a client and as a friend for years. So I sold it to him, and I recommended that he go to Phil Hooker in Tauranga, who's a very experienced gyrocopter training pilot, very, very experienced aviator. And I even rang Phil and organised it for him. But the chap I sold it to, he for some reason decided to go elsewhere. And the accident report hasn't come out, but I was there. I know what happened. And in my view, it was total lack of training. I couldn't help him. It was a single-seater. And he took off on his first flight in it. I think I've said to you this to you before, I was bloody terrified at how terrified he wasn't. And I think he just found it nothing like he thought it was going to be. He'd completed a training program up north, and I'd questioned whether it was sufficient. I'd rung his instructor several times, expressing my concern that, have you covered this pilot-induced oscillations? Have you done? Yes. He was the best student he'd ever had. And, basically he took off. And that was an event on its own. He got to about 240 feet, 250 feet, and lost control of it, and came back down and impacted the ground very, very hard, and it burst into flames, and that was the stone end of it.
In front of you?
Yeah, right in front of it. It was just terrible. Bloody shame. Didn't need to happen, real tragedy. Hell of a nice guy. But yeah.
Pretty hard to get over something like that.
It's a story that you see often in aviation that you just get a feeling there's not enough preparation. And coming back to what your very original question about a candidate to train to give an ag rating to, they've got to be frightened of it. Really.
I've got a couple of last questions for you. We're just about at the end. Just not a question, but you mentioned that you met Jean Batten.
Yes, I did.
At a marker.
Yeah.
And I found it amazing. I was reading about her. After what she did in the 30s in a gypsy moth, she flew on Concorde halfway to New Zealand.
Go on.
Which is amazing. You imagine seeing that two extremes. You probably couldn't get more extremes.
No,
than that.
you couldn't.
Anyway, that's not a question.
It's about as extreme as a top dressing pilot going from a tiger moth to a beaver next day.
If you had the funds and resources to build the ultimate ag aircraft, what would it look like? Would it be a fatty, or would it be a...
It would be a turbine Fat Man, which we nearly got once. We looked at with Pete Furlong with the Allison 250, but we figured, like the Cessna Caravan only having 10 seats couldn't pay for the turbine, and they had to stretch it to a Grand Caravan. The Hopper and the Fat Man just wouldn't be big enough to pay for it. But boy, it would be a great aeroplane. I basically thought about it for suspension, because you're towing a lot of weight and drag in that spray gear. And if you could have just even got every load, another 200 kilos in there, it would have upped the economics of it, no end. But again, it was really the thoughts of a pipe dreamer, really.
Do you have a proudest moment in your career? And the next question is, do you have a lowest moment? So maybe one or the other would.
I don't know about a proudest moment, but the greatest moment was when that spray boom kept unblocking. Mm. I remember I was euphoric about that. The lowest moment probably was... Well, I remember when George Anderson was killed, that knocked me around a lot. But a straight depressive moment was probably standing there in the pouring rain with my beautiful Fat Man wrapped around a strainer post, mother having to stay in the wreck to keep dry. and all the fabric on the side hanging down like washing, because it had been ripped open, and it wasn't a good moment. But no, I've been pretty happy right through the top dressing, and I wouldn't change anything. I had a ball, really. Yeah, it was great. Can't believe it's over, really.
Yeah. Got a statement to finish with that someone gave me when I was researching about you. There are very few people of Ray's quality. I'm blowing a bit of smoke up.
I was going to say, yeah.
Very few people of Ray's quality. He's humble, forgiving, humorous. He has massive standards. He's very trusting. His memory is amazing, and that's without even mentioning his storytelling ability. And I just thought to myself,
who told you that?
Oh, I'm not saying who. I just thought to myself, that's an amazing compliment, which I would agree with wholeheartedly for someone who's finished their career. If I was in your boat and had someone say that about me, I'd be really proud. So anyway, so should you be.
Yeah,
and,
it's nice that people think kindly of you, because there's been a few that haven't over the years.
Well, at least one does.
Yeah, that's good.
So anyway, well done, and thanks very much for talking to me.
No, thank you, Craig. It's nice to see Patchett Ag-Air on a few tails around aeroplanes that are still there.
Absolutely.
That I used to own, and the owners are happy enough to... in fact, one of them asked me, did I mind if he kept the name, because his father used to top dress, and it just reminded him. And I said, no, you go for your life.
It's and like it turns up here now. It's a legacy sort of carrying on, even though you're not part of it.
And I was very happy when Nigel decided to keep the name. It wasn't a financial thing. I didn't charge him goodwill for it or anything. I was just quite flattered, really, and to see that beautiful new beaver he's got there with Patchett Ag-Air on it is quite a buzz, really. Yeah.